James Carter had built Urban Bites from the ground up, a humble sandwich counter that had grown into a successful chain of 12 delis across the state. For over a decade, he had poured his energy into the business, proud of the community connections, the homemade recipes, and the reputation for treating people well, both customers and staff. But lately, something had changed. The complaints were no longer occasional, they were piling up. Long wait times, rude service, stressed out employees. At first, James brushed it off as growing pains, but the reports kept coming, and worse, they didn't match what his district managers were telling him. Their feedback was always overly positive, overly polished, minor issues, they called them. Just the usual turnover. Still, a knot had formed in James's gut that refused to loosen. He started to dig into online reviews, customer surveys, and even anonymous emails from employees. What he found was troubling. One review mentioned a manager yelling at staff in front of customers. Another talked about an employee crying in the back room after being reprimanded for helping an elderly guest. James sat in his sleek downtown office staring at these testimonials, feeling more disconnected from his company than ever. How had things fallen so far without him noticing? How had Urban Bites, his pride and joy, become a place people dreaded instead of loved? He realized he had to stop looking at spreadsheets and start seeing reality. Not the numbers, not the filtered reports, but the truth. After weeks of planning, James made a decision that would change everything. He contacted a professional makeup artist he'd worked with once during a corporate event and asked for a complete transformation. A trimmed beard, faded hoodie, thick-rimmed glasses, and a well-worn baseball cap turned James Carter into someone unrecognizable. His tailored suits were swapped for thrift store jeans and old sneakers. He adopted a new name, Jake Lawson, a new hire starting his first shift as a deli trainee. No one in the store would suspect a thing. Most frontline workers had never met him, and upper management rarely visited this location. If he played it right, James could move among the staff unnoticed. The next morning, James, now Jake, walked into one of Urban Bites' busiest stores, located on the edge of a hard-working blue-collar neighborhood. The street outside was already bustling, the scent of fresh bread spilling out of the bakery 2 doors down. A few customers loitered outside the deli, waiting for the 9 a.m. opening. James took a deep breath before pushing open the door, his heart pounding with nerves he hadn't felt in years. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The linoleum floor was scuffed. A tall, wiry man glanced up from behind the counter, barely making eye contact. "You?" The new guy he asked already, walking away. "Grab an apron, don't screw it up." That man, James would soon learn, was Derek Mitchell, the store's general manager. Derek handed him a stained apron and pointed toward the back with a grunt. "No. Warm welcome, no tour. Just orders." James tied the apron around his waist and stepped behind the counter, trying to blend in. He was paired with a young woman named Emily, who introduced herself quickly with a polite but tired smile. "It gets wild here during lunch," she said, "but I'll show you the ropes." Even in that brief interaction, James could sense the strain behind her eyes, the kind that doesn't come from a bad day, but from many bad days. As the minutes turned to hours, James began his first shift not as a CEO, but as a silent observer inside his own company. He took in every detail, the way employees rushed between tasks, the occasional muttered complaints, the impatient customers, the manager who barked orders but never lifted a hand to help. By noon, the store was swarming with foot traffic, and James was already seeing the cracks in the system, ones no spreadsheet could ever reveal. Something was deeply wrong here, and he was ready to find out just how deep the damage went. Emily seemed like the kind of person you could count on even in a storm. She was maybe in her mid-20s, with chestnut brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and dark circles under her eyes that even a smile couldn't hide. When James, still undercover, as Jake was assigned to shadow her, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We're short-staffed," she said simply, "but I'll show you what you need to know." Her tone wasn't cold, just tired. Still, she offered him a gentle smile as she led him through the morning routine. The store hadn't officially opened yet, but already she was moving with purpose, checking supplies, organizing the sandwich station, and prepping the bread. "This part's easy," she said as she showed him how to load the slicer. "The hard part is staying sane during the lunch rush." James followed her lead, trying to absorb every motion, every habit. It struck him how she never complained despite clearly being overworked. She answered every question he had with patience, even when he fumbled with the register or misread a receipt. What James noticed most, though, was her presence. Emily paid attention. She noticed when customers seemed confused, she greeted the regulars by name, and even when Derek barked orders from the back, she stayed calm. Her kindness wasn't forced, it was instinctual. Yet despite her best efforts, there was a weariness in her that James couldn't ignore. It lingered in the way she rubbed her temples between customers, or how she tried to smile but rarely reached her eyes. Around 2 p.m., after the bulk of the lunch rush had passed, James realized something odd. Emily still hadn't taken a break. She'd been on her feet since he arrived, moving non-stop. He waited until the line died down before asking, "Aren't you going to grab lunch?" Emily glanced at the clock, then gave a small shrug. "Nah, I'm fine." James raised an eyebrow. "Seriously, you've been going all day." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I usually bring food from home, but I didn't have anything today." She offered a quick, dismissive chuckle. "It's just one of those weeks, you know." James nodded, unsure what to say. But her next words hit harder than he expected. "Even with the employee discount, it's still too expensive here sometimes." Her voice was quiet, almost like she was ashamed of saying it out loud. And that was what made it so gut-wrenching. Here she was, one of the hardest working employees in the store, and she couldn't even afford a sandwich at the place she helped run. James felt something shift in that moment. Not anger, not guilt, but a deep, sobering recognition. He had spent years building Urban Bites into a success story, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of the very people who kept it going. Emily didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't ask for anything. She just kept working, even as her stomach grumbled. For the rest of the day, James couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time Emily smiled at a customer, he remembered her skipping lunch. Every time Derek barked at someone, he thought of Emily's calm composure, despite everything he began to see. The deli not as a business, but as a pressure cooker, and people like Emily were the ones absorbing the heat. That night, when James sat alone in his car in the parking lot, he didn't think about profit margins or quarterly targets. He thought about how a woman who gave so much had so little in return, and he knew something was very, very wrong. He took one last look at the store through the windshield before driving off. The fluorescent lights buzzed quietly inside, casting a pale glow across the counter where Emily was still working. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His disguise might have kept him hidden, but the truth had already found him. The numbers in his reports hadn't told this story. The managers hadn't spoken this truth. But in one short day, Emily had shown him everything he needed to see, not with words, but with actions, resilience, and quiet dignity. And James Carter wasn't going to forget it. From the moment the doors opened at Urban Bites the next morning, the store slipped into a rhythm. James Carter recognized all too well fast-paced high pressure and teetering on the edge of chaos. But there was a crucial difference now. As Jake, he wasn't observing from a distance or through numbers on a screen. He was in it, elbow deep in sandwich wrappers and customer complaints. And right in the center of it all, barking commands like a drill sergeant in a battlefield, stood Derek Mitchell, the store's manager. Derek had a sharp, nasal voice that cut through the room like a blade, manny that bread's burnt. "Are you blind?" he shouted from across the kitchen. "Sarah, hurry up with those drinks. We're not running a daycare here." There was no respect in his tone, no coaching, no support, only threats. What struck James wasn't just the volume or the anger, it was how routine it all seemed. No one flinched anymore. The staff barely reacted when Derek snapped. Some avoided eye contact. Others moved faster, heads down. It was clear this wasn't a one-time bad day. It was the daily norm. At one point, a new cashier fumbled a receipt and Derek exploded. You've been here 2 weeks and you still don't know how to print a damn receipt. Maybe this job isn't for you." The young woman's hands trembled as she tried to correct the mistake. James stood frozen, stunned by how casually Derek humiliated her in front of customers. Several patrons exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one said a word. They were used to it too. Later, during a quiet moment near the dishwashing station, James overheard two employees whispering by the cooler. "You heard about Jenny?" one asked. "She quit last night, just walked out." The other nodded. "Can't blame her. Derek's been worse lately." James paused, pretending to scrub a tray, his ears sharp. Another name, another resignation. He began connecting the dots. High, turnover, missed shifts, understaffing. It wasn't bad luck. It was Derek's leadership, or rather, the lack of it. Employees weren't leaving for better opportunities. They were fleeing from a toxic environment that had quietly spiraled out of control under his watch. James tried to remain silent, tried to stay in character, but every time Derek barked at someone, every time he rolled his eyes or dismissed an honest mistake with open disdain, James had to fight the urge to pull off his disguise and confront him on the spot. Derek never offered help, not even when the line stretched to the door. Instead, he stood at the back with a clipboard pretending to manage inventory, or worse, scolding employees for not upselling chips or drinks. "Push the combos," he yelled. "If you're not adding to the ticket, you're not doing your job." Never once did James see him take a single customer order. Not once did he jump in to make a sandwich, refill a napkin station, or wipe a messy table. He managed through fear, not action. And yet somehow the team kept pushing forward, not because of Derek, but in spite of him. James watched Emily once again become the invisible glue holding the store together. She diffused tensions, apologized to customers, and even took over a sandwich station when one of the cooks had to step out. She didn't seek praise, she just did what had to be done. That contrast burned in James's mind. Emily worked from the heart, Derek ruled through fear. The gap between them was so wide it was almost laughable, and yet Derek was the one with the title, the authority, the paycheck. It was becoming harder and harder for James to stay silent. By the time the lunch rush had passed, James felt emotionally exhausted, not from the physical work, but from watching a broken system in motion. It wasn't just Derek's behavior, it was the culture he had created. People were walking on eggshells, bracing for scolding, surviving each shift instead of thriving. James sat in the storage area during a short break, staring blankly at a box of napkins stacked to the ceiling. The truth was undeniable now. Urban Bites wasn't suffering because of customer complaints. It was suffering because leadership at the ground level had rotted, and until that changed, no policy, no promotion, no marketing campaign would save them. The store was at its peak. Noon on a Friday, and Urban Bites was barely holding it together. Orders flew across the line like confetti. Customers stood shoulder to shoulder, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted meats, fresh bread, and rising tension. James, still in disguise as Jake, did his best to keep up. He wrapped sandwiches with clumsy hands, wiped down the counters between orders, and tried not to get in anyone's way. It was loud, fast, and overwhelming. Derek, as usual, barked orders from behind the register arms, Cross doing little more than yelling about upselling bottled drinks and combo deals. James had just dropped off a tray when he noticed something from the corner of his eye, something that made everything around him blur. Near the front of the line, an elderly man in a wheelchair was struggling to maneuver through the crowd. He looked disoriented, his voice nearly drowned out by the chaos around him. "Excuse me. I just need a little help," he said softly, gripping the wheels with weak hands. Most customers either didn't notice or pretended not to. The man's presence slowed the rhythm of the rush, and James instinctively moved to step in. But before he could react, someone else already had Emily. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask permission. She simply moved. Leaving her station behind the sandwich counter, she walked out from behind the prep area, crouched beside the man and smiled. "Hi there," she said gently. "What can I get for you today?" Her tone was warm, patient, and kind. Like the world had stopped spinning for just a moment. The man's shoulders visibly relaxed. "A turkey sandwich and a coffee, please," he said, his voice trembling. "Got it," Emily replied without missing a beat. "You take a seat, I'll be right back with it." She helped guide his wheelchair to a small table in the corner, out of the way of the crowd, and then rushed to the kitchen to prepare his order herself. James watched his chest tightening. It was a simple act, so small, so human, but it stood out like a light in the darkness. Emily didn't do it for attention. She did it because it was right. In the middle of the rush, surrounded by impatience and noise, she chose empathy, and for that she paid the price. As soon as Emily returned from delivering the man's sandwich, Derek exploded. He stormed across the floor, eyes blazing, voice rising above the room like a warning bell. "Emily!" "What the hell was that?" he yelled. "You just left your station in the middle of the rush. Are you kidding me?" Customers nearby turned their heads. A hush fell over the front counter. Emily looked up, startled but composed. "I was helping a customer. He couldn't get through the line," she explained. "I don't care," Derek snapped. "That's not your job. You do that again. Don't bother showing up tomorrow." The deli fell silent for a heartbeat. Emily's jaw tightened. She nodded once and quietly returned to her station. The man in the corner watched from a distance, confusion and guilt etched across his face. James felt something inside him snap. His hands were clenched at his sides. He could feel his pulse in his ears. The urge to rip off his disguise and shut Derek down right then and there was overwhelming. How dare he? How could anyone with authority speak to a person like that, especially for showing kindness? But James forced himself to breathe. He had come here to understand the full picture, and if he acted too soon, he might never uncover the depth of what was broken. So, instead, he said nothing. He watched. He burned inside, and he remembered every word. The rest of the shift passed like a blur. Customers continued to pour in. Oblivious to the quiet storm brewing behind the scenes, Emily moved with mechanical focus, her usual warmth dulled by the confrontation. She didn't complain, she didn't retaliate, but her light had dimmed. Even as she smiled at customers and handed off orders, James could see it. She was retreating inward, trying not to be noticed again, trying not to risk another attack. Derek, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened, returning to his usual spot behind the counter, throwing side glances but offering no apology, no acknowledgement. At the end of the day, after the doors were locked and the last customer had left, James lingered behind. He found himself staring at the table in the corner where the old man had eaten, where Emily had shown compassion in a moment when no one else did. He thought of how quickly that compassion had been punished. That table, that moment, it said more about the state of the store than any report or review ever could, and as James swept the floor in silence, he knew he was reaching a breaking point. One more incident, one more sign, and the truth would no longer be something he could quietly observe. It would be something he'd have to confront. The sun had already dipped below the rooftops when James Carter stepped outside the back of the Urban Bites deli for a breath of air. His arms ached from hauling crates and cleaning fryers, and his mind was still spinning from the emotional roller coaster of the day. The street behind the store was quiet now, lined with dumpsters and delivery trucks long gone. He leaned against the wall, collecting his thoughts, when a sharp voice cut through the silence. It was Derek, just around the corner, pacing near the dumpster with his phone pressed to his ear. James froze, careful not to make a sound. Derek's voice was low, but clear. "Yeah, I've been skimming a little," he muttered. "Just here and there. The higher-ups don't notice. They're too busy with their fancy spreadsheets to catch anything. I've got it down to a science." James didn't move, didn't blink. The words rang like gunshots in his ears. Skimming. It wasn't just bad leadership anymore. It was theft. Real, traceable, deliberate theft. Derek continued, oblivious. "Yeah, I reroute some of the cash sales before they're logged. I know which registers to do it from which days are busiest. Easy money. And with all the turnover, no one's asking questions." James's stomach turned. The man who berated hard-working staff, who humiliated employees in front of customers who offered no support, was stealing from the very company he claimed to run. James backed away slowly and slipped inside through the kitchen door, his hands shaking not with fear, but with fury. That night, James didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his home office surrounded by years of financial records, store reports, and transaction logs. He logged into the corporate database, digging into the sales figures from Derek's location. Every number now had meaning. Every pattern, every missing cent, every discrepancy had a face. James compared register logs with shift schedules, inventory orders with sales receipts, and then it appeared clear as day. Dozens of small but consistent cash shortages hidden in the busiest shifts, the highest volume sales. All traced back to Derek's management, cross-checking the timelines. The patterns lined up with Derek's work schedule. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. His instincts were right, and now he had the proof. But proof wasn't enough. Action was what mattered. James spent the next few hours drafting a report and documenting every instance of theft he had uncovered. He printed backup copies, saved digital versions, and forwarded them to a secure folder only accessible by him and the company's compliance officer. He rehearsed the conversation in his mind over and over again. There would be no warning, no second chances. Derek had crossed the line and James was ready to erase it. He knew that this wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Every dollar stolen was another reason employees like Emily suffered. Every lie Derek told widened the gap between leadership and the people doing the real work. James wouldn't let it continue. The next morning, James arrived at the deli earlier than usual. He parked 3 blocks away to keep attention off himself and took a long walk through the neighborhood before heading inside. The streets were waking up. Buses passed by shopkeepers, unlocked doors, and the first customers began to trickle toward the deli. He paused outside the glass door, watching through the window. Derek was already inside, clipboard in hand, berating a delivery driver who was only 2 minutes behind schedule. His posture, his tone, his complete lack of self-awareness, it was all on display. James took a deep breath and stepped inside, adjusting his Jake disguise one last time. Today was the day everything would change. Throughout the morning, James stayed focused, working silently behind the counter, keeping an eye on Derek as he moved through the store like a tyrant on patrol. He noticed how the staff flinched when Derek passed, how conversations stopped, and how even the air seemed heavier when he was in the room. James could feel the tension brewing, and beneath it his own. He wasn't just carrying the weight of his role anymore. He was carrying the weight of a promise to every employee who had been mistreated, to every dollar stolen from the business, and to every customer who had walked into a broken system and walked out disappointed. This was bigger than one manager. It was a statement about what kind of company Urban Bites would be. As the lunch crowd started to build, James worked alongside Emily, once again pretending to focus on sandwiches while his mind churned. Derek's voice echoed in the background, issuing orders. He wouldn't follow himself. But this time, James didn't feel helpless. He wasn't watching silently anymore. He was waiting for the right moment. The final confrontation was coming, and when it did, it would be decisive, undeniable, and public. For too long, people like Emily had suffered in silence. Today, that silence would end. The lunch rush hit like a tidal wave. Customers packed into Urban Bites, shoulder to shoulder, voices layered on top of each other, all clamoring for sandwiches, sides, and drinks. James, still disguised as Jake, was back behind the counter beside Emily, working in rhythm. Now faster, more precise, but still alert to every detail. The line seemed never-ending, and even though the heat from the kitchen was stifling, the real tension came from Derek, who stalked the floor like a hawk, barking orders and hurling criticisms. Every few minutes he found a new reason to belittle someone. The team moved like clockwork, not out of pride, but out of fear. And then amid the chaos, a quiet interruption changed everything. A small boy, no older than 10, slipped into the store. His clothes rumpled shoes, a size too big. He held a crumpled $5 bill tightly in his fist and stood quietly at the edge of the line, unsure of where to go. His eyes scanned the counter nervously, then landed on Emily. She noticed him right away. With hundreds of details pulling at her attention, she still saw him. She gave James a quick nod to cover her station, then walked around the counter and bent down to meet the boy at eye level. There, she said gently. Are you here for lunch? The boy nodded slowly, barely above a whisper. Can I get the smallest sandwich you have? I'm really hungry. But I only have this. He held up the bill like it was everything he had. Emily's expression softened, and without hesitation she smiled. You don't worry about that. Okay, we'll get you something good. She walked back behind the counter, grabbed a full-size turkey sandwich, added a bag of chips and a bottle of water, then handed them to the boy. Here you go, she said warmly. Just promise me you'll eat it all. Deal. The boy's face lit up. Really, thank you so much. He clutched the food to his chest like it was a treasure and darted out the door. James felt a lump in his throat as he watched. It was a small moment, but it carried more weight than anything else that had happened that week. Emily hadn't just fed a hungry child, she had reminded everyone around her what human decency looked like, but of course not everyone saw it that way. Derek had been watching from the prep station, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and as soon as the boy disappeared through the front door, he exploded Emily. He shouted, storming across the floor. Did you just give away a free meal? She turned, startled but calm. It was just one sandwich. Derek, the kid, was hungry. Derek's face turned red. This isn't a charity. Do you think food grows on trees? That's coming out of your paycheck. Gasps rippled through the team. Emily held her ground voice steady. He had $5. I gave him more than he could afford. That's it. But Derek wasn't having it. You don't make that call. I do. You want to keep your job. You follow the rules. James had heard enough. The dam inside him finally burst. He stepped forward, removing his apron and gloves, his voice firm and clear. Let it go, Derek. Derek spun around, confused. Excuse me. James didn't back down. It was a sandwich. One sandwich. You want to threaten someone's paycheck over that? Derek's eyes narrowed. You're a trainee. You don't get to lecture me on how I run this store. James took a deep breath. You're right. I don't. But I'm not just a trainee. For now, he held back the full truth. The time would come soon enough. But in this moment, it was enough to stand beside Emily and draw the line. The rest of the team stood frozen eyes, darting between Derek and James. Emily looked stunned, her lips slightly parted, unsure what to say. James turned to her, his tone softer. You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. For a long second, no one moved. Then Derek scoffed and stormed off, muttering curses under his breath as he disappeared into the back office. The air in the deli shifted. It was subtle but real. For the first time, someone had pushed back. Someone had said no. James glanced at the counter at the door where the boy had exited minutes earlier, and at the weary faces of employees who had long forgotten what support looked like. He knew the confrontation was only just beginning, but he also knew this. The next time he faced Derek, he wouldn't be wearing a disguise. The clock on the wall struck 9:15 p.m. when the last customer walked out of Urban Bites and the front doors were locked behind them. The energy inside the store had shifted relief mixed with exhaustion. The usual routine would be cleaning quick cash counts and a few half-hearted conversations before everyone scattered home. But tonight, James Carter, still wearing the persona of Jake, stood quietly at the edge of the sandwich station, his hands clasped in front of him, heart pounding harder than it had during any lunch rush. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. Tonight was the night he would drop the act, and he knew once he did nothing inside, this store would ever be the same. He took a step forward and cleared his throat. Hey everyone, he said. Voice louder than usual. Heads turned. Emily, drying her hands at the sink, looked up. Manny paused mid-sweep. Even Derek, still seated behind the register with a scowl on his face, glanced over. "Can I ask you all to stay just a few more minutes? There's something I need to say." A few exchanged confused glances, but no one moved. James walked to the center of the floor, reached up and slowly removed his hat. Then came the glasses, then the false beard. Piece by piece, Jake the trainee vanished, and in his place stood the real man behind Urban Bites. For a moment, silence reigned. "My name is James Carter," he said. "Meeting every eye in the room, I'm the founder and CEO of this company. And for the past week, I've been working alongside all of you. Not because I had to, but because I needed to see what was really happening here. Not on paper, not in reports, but here with my own eyes. You could have heard a pin drop." Emily's hand went to her mouth. Manny blinked in disbelief. One of the cooks let out a shocked, "Wait, what?" James turned, locking eyes with Derek, whose face had drained of color. He took a step closer, voice steady. "And what I've seen here is unacceptable. You've been stealing from this company." James said, addressing Derek directly, "I overheard your phone call, and I've reviewed the financial records. I know exactly what you've been doing, and I have proof." Derek stood abruptly. "You can't be serious," he blurted. "You can't just—" "I can." James cut in. "And I just did. You're fired. Effective immediately. Get your things and leave." Derek's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence returned this time, heavy with finality. Without another word, he stormed toward the back, slamming the door behind him. A moment later, the faint sound of a locker being yanked open echoed down the hallway. James turned back to the team eyes softening. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see what was happening in my own stores. You all deserve better. Much better." He looked at Emily, whose eyes were still wide, still processing Emily. He said, "You've shown more leadership, more heart, and more strength than anyone should ever have to in a place like this. You helped that boy without hesitation. You've trained new hires with patience. You've picked up the pieces when others fell apart. I want to offer you the position of store manager, effective immediately if you'll take it." Her jaw dropped me, she whispered. "But I don't even know if I'm ready." James smiled. "You've already been doing the work. It's time you got the title and the respect that come with it." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down." James turned to the rest of the staff. "Starting today, we're rolling out new policies across all locations. Every employee gets a free meal during their shift. Breaks will no longer be optional. They're mandatory. And most importantly, no one should ever feel disrespected, unheard, or afraid to come to work." The team stared at him, stunned. Then one by one, cautious smiles began to form. A cook nodded. A cashier exhaled. Even the assistant manager, who had remained silent all evening, gave a small approving thumbs up. James felt a weight lifting from the room. Not just because Derek was gone, but because for the first time in a long time, the people who made Urban Bites what it was felt seen. As he glanced around the room, at the young woman who had skipped lunch to save money, at the boy who had walked in with $5, at the staff who had kept working even when no one said thank you, James knew this wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about reclaiming the soul of his company. And tonight, in the quiet hum of refrigerators and mop buckets, the real work was just beginning. 2 weeks had passed since James Carter removed his disguise, fired a corrupt manager, and reset the moral compass of Urban Bites. But to him, it felt like a lifetime. In the days following his undercover reveal, he had visited several other stores in the chain, unannounced, eyes wide open, ears sharper than ever. He knew now that numbers were only half the story. Culture, the invisible thread that bound people together, was the true engine of a business. And today he was returning to the very store where his eyes had first been opened. This time he wasn't in disguise, no more hoodie, no more fake beard, just James, just himself. As he approached the storefront, the place felt lighter, brighter, even. The windows had been cleaned. The now hiring sign had been replaced with a small chalkboard that read, "Welcome to Urban Bites, where good food meets good people." Through the glass, James could already see a difference. There was laughter coming from behind the counter. Customers were chatting casually as they waited for their orders, and the team moved with a rhythm that felt less mechanical and more joyful. It wasn't perfect. There were still long lines, and someone had clearly over-toasted a tray of bread, but the energy had changed. It was real, and it was hopeful. Inside, the transformation was even more evident. The staff greeted him with a mix of surprise and pride. Some waved, others offered small nods, but all of it was warm. He spotted Manny now confidently managing the register, cracking a joke with a customer. Another cook hummed along to the classic rock station, playing in the background as he prepped ingredients. And there at the heart of it all stood Emily, wearing a crisp navy blue apron embroidered with her name and the word manager. She was leaning over the sandwich counter, patiently walking a new employee through the steps of assembling their first sub. Her voice was calm and steady. Her eyes were focused. There was no trace of the hesitation James had seen in her weeks ago. Now she stood like a captain guiding her ship. James took a seat at a table near the front and watched for a few moments unnoticed. He didn't want to interrupt. He wanted to take it in. The Urban Bites he had built was finally becoming the Urban Bites he had dreamed of, a place where kindness and competence weren't at odds, where leadership wasn't loud and threatening, but quiet, present, and consistent. A customer turned to him and said, "This place feels different." Now, better. You can tell people actually want to be here. James smiled. That one sentence meant more to him than any spreadsheet or sales report ever could. Eventually, Emily noticed him. Her face lit up with genuine joy, and she made her way around the counter. "James, you're back," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's good to see you." He stood to greet her. "I just wanted to stop by. See how things were going?" he replied. She gestured around the store. "So much better. I can't even begin to tell you." They sat together for a few minutes as Emily shared updates, the improvements, the hiccups, the funny moments from new hires trying to keep up with the rush. She told him about how the team had slowly begun to trust the changes were real. At first they didn't believe the free meals were going to last, or that breaks were truly mandatory, but now they believe it. James nodded, deeply. "Moved. And you?" he asked. "How's it been for you, stepping into the role?" Emily paused, then smiled. "It's a challenge, but it's the good kind. I feel like I finally get to do the job I always wanted to do. And more than that, I feel like I have your trust. That makes all the difference." James leaned back, watching her with pride. She wasn't just managing the store, she was shaping its future. He didn't need to check numbers to know that business was improving. He could feel it. Right, there in the air. Urban Bites had become more than just a deli. It had become a place of purpose. After chatting for a while at the corner table, James leaned in, lowering his voice just slightly. "By the way," he said with a smile, "I haven't been able to stop thinking about that boy, the one you helped during the lunch rush." Emily's expression immediately softened. Her eyes flickered with memory, and she let out a quiet breath. "I've been thinking about him too," she replied. "He actually came back." James straightened in his seat. "Surprised?" "Really?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, a few days after you left, he walked in again. But this time he wasn't alone. He brought his mum." She paused, the corners of her lips lifting gently. She looked tired, like life had been heavy for a while, but she also had this gratitude in her eyes. "The moment she saw me, she walked straight over." James said nothing, just listened, the ambient noise of the deli fading behind her words. "She thanked me." Emily continued again and again. She said they'd fallen on hard times, that things had spiraled out of control after her husband passed. She hadn't planned on her son going out that day. He had gone looking for food because they didn't have much at home. Emily's voice grew quieter, her tone more tender. She told me she was embarrassed that she didn't want to be seen as someone looking for handouts. Then she tried to give me a $10 bill to pay me back. She paused again, her gaze drifting, but I wouldn't take it. I told her it wasn't about the money. James felt his throat tighten, the weight of her words settling over him like a quiet wave. "What did she say?" he asked gently. Emily gave a small smile. She cried. "Just a little. She said no one had treated her that kindly in a long time. Then she hugged me. She held my hand and said, 'Thank you for seeing us, not for feeding us, for seeing us.'" For a moment neither of them spoke. The deli buzzed softly around them, orders being taken, laughter at the prep station, the bell above the door jingling every few minutes, but at their table time seemed to slow. James leaned back, his eyes misty, though he blinked the emotion away, that he said after a pause, "That's what this place should be about. Not just sandwiches or sales or foot traffic, but seeing people, recognizing when someone needs a little extra and offering it without judgment, without paperwork, without permission." He met her eyes. "You didn't ask for credit. You didn't check with a manager. You just did what your heart told you was right. And that's what makes this place worth building." Emily looked down, brushing her fingers along the edge of the table, a little embarrassed by the praise but deeply moved. "I just didn't want him to leave hungry," she said softly. "It didn't seem fair. A kid shouldn't have to feel that kind of weight." James nodded. "And you reminded me of that. You reminded me that at the heart of every company, every brand, there should be a pulse, a conscience, something deeper than profits and procedures." He paused. "You reminded me that Urban Bites has to be about people first." They sat together in that quiet understanding for a while, just two people connected by a moment that had started with a simple sandwich and ended with something far more powerful. Around them, the world of the deli kept moving. Orders were taken. Food was prepped. Laughter echoed through the small space. But in that corner booth, James felt more connected to his company than he had in years. Not because of strategy or growth, but because of humanity. And in that moment, he knew with certainty the future of Urban Bites was in compassionate hands. James lingered for a moment longer at the table, the conversation with Emily still echoing in his heart. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope, one he'd prepared that very morning, unsure if the moment would feel right. But now, with everything she had just shared, with the gentle way she had described helping that boy and his mother, he knew it was not only the right time, it was necessary. "Before I go," he said, placing the envelope on the table between them, "I have one more thing for you." Emily looked at it, puzzled. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," James said softly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she peeled back the flap and pulled out a check. As her eyes scanned the numbers, she froze. Her breath hitched. "James, this is too much. I can't accept this." Her voice was barely above a whisper, stunned by the generosity printed in ink. He shook his head gently. "Yes, you can, and you will. It's not just a bonus, Emily. It's a thank you. For stepping up when things were falling apart, for protecting this store when no one else would, for showing courage when it was easier to stay silent, and for proving that empathy isn't weakness, it's strength." She looked down at the check again, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes but not falling. Instead, a quiet smile crept across her lips. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, recognized, valued. She clutched the envelope against her chest, like it was something sacred, and when she finally looked up, her voice had changed. There was no doubt, no hesitation, just gratitude and pride. "Thank you," she said. "I don't even know what to say. I've never felt this kind of belief in me before." James smiled, eyes warm. "You've already said everything in your actions. Just promise me one thing. Keep being exactly who you are." They stood together for a brief moment. No longer CEO and employee, but equals bound by shared purpose. James stepped back, gave her a final nod, and turned to leave. As he walked toward the front door, he passed the register where Manny was laughing with a customer, the kitchen where two cooks were singing to the radio, and the entryway where the chalkboard now read, "Kindness is served here." Each small detail filled James with something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't about growth charts or profit projections anymore. It was about the people, The ones who stayed late, who showed up early, who gave extra, even when they had little to spare. As he stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, James paused on the sidewalk and turned back to look at the deli one more time. Through the window, he saw Emily already back at work, coaching the new hire with that same patience and care that had once saved the store from falling apart. And in that instant, James realized something profound. Leadership wasn't about titles, offices, or bottom lines. It was about presence, about listening, about never losing sight of the people who make the mission real. The deli hadn't just been renewed, he had been renewed. With a deep breath, James walked down the street, not as a distant executive, but as a man newly reconnected to what truly mattered. There were still other stores to visit, other stories to uncover, other leaders like Emily waiting to be discovered. But now he would no longer lead from a boardroom. He would lead from within, with his sleeves rolled up, his heart open, and his eyes wide, because sometimes the most powerful change doesn't come from the top. It begins behind the counter with one small act of kindness that ripples across an entire company. If this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ, where real stories, raw truths, and transformative moments come to life. We shine a light on the people behind the uniforms, the hearts behind the hustle, and the compassion that can change a company from the inside out. Share this video with someone who believes kindness still matters, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can build a more human world, one story at a time.